Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to teach you about everybody's favorite dead Greek guy formula, the Pythagorean Theorem, named after Pythagoras. Although Pythagoras wasn't the guy who discovered it, we're just naming it that because of reasons. I don't know. Anyway, the dead Greek guy formula, Pythagoras. So we're going to use this formula anytime you got a right angle triangle where you know two sides and you're trying to find the third side. And there's two possible ways this can be set up. And it depends on whether or not you're trying to find the hypotenuse or you already know your hypotenuse. Now, if you know what hypotenuse is, that's great. If you don't know what hypotenuse is, that's the first thing we need to figure out. So the hypotenuse is this side here in this triangle, and that is the side that is opposite the right angle. Okay, so in this triangle here, A, B, and C, which one is the hypotenuse? Well, it's going to be the one that is across from the right angle. So that is C. And in fact, we're always going to label the hypotenuse C. That means when we go to use our formula, we're always going to know which side is which. And in particular, all that we really care is the side the hypotenuse or not the hypotenuse? Because the other two sides, A and B, it doesn't matter what order you label them. Your two short sides are sort of interchangeable. But it does matter which side is your hypotenuse. So you need to know which side of your hypotenuse first. And this gives us our sort of straightforward formula here. And this is the formula you're going to use when you don't know C. So when you don't know your hypotenuse, you're going to use the C squared equals A squared plus B squared formula. So let's jump right into an example. Our first example here, we don't know Q. Q is across from our right angle. So that makes this triangle here a Pythagorean theorem question where we don't know our C. So C squared equals A squared plus B squared. And in this case, our hypotenuse is Q. So Q squared is, now A and B, I'm going to substitute my numbers now. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if you do 6.9 first or 8.8 first. Those are your two short legs, right? You've got one over here and you've got one over here. And it literally doesn't matter what order you do them, so long as you do them both. I've got a left to right bias, so I'm going to do the 6.9 first because it's on the left, but it really doesn't matter. You could do the 8.8 first if that's your jam. Okay, now from here, we're just going to do like all of this in our calculator. The 6.9 squared plus the 8.8 squared. Most of us have a calculator that can do this in one step. Even if you don't have like a fancy calculator like this graphing calculator, if you've got a squared button, if you just do 6.9 squared plus 8.8 squared, and then hit your equals, you should get 125.05. But not all calculators will do this correctly. So I'd like you to pause the video right now, try to do 6.9 squared plus 8.8 squared on your calculator, and make sure you actually get 125.05. Okay. Hopefully you paused and actually tried that. If you didn't get it, don't despair, not a big deal. You're just gonna have to do an extra step, unfortunately. So this sort of pink step here is sort of the optional step for those of you who don't have a calculator that gives you your 125.05 right off the bat. And you're going to actually just need to do it in a couple steps. You'll do your 6.9 squared, which is 47.61. And if your calculator doesn't even have a squared button, you might need to do 6.9 and then your exponent button. On this calculator, it's this sort of caret button here. Sometimes it's also like an X to the Y button, like this, X to the Y, or a Y to the X button. I think the iPhone calculator is a Y to the X button. Anyway, whatever this is, that's your exponent button. You might need to do your exponent button and then 2, because that's like squared, right? Exponent 2. 6.9 squared, 47.61. And then you're going to have to do the same thing for 8.8 squared. So plus 77.44. And then you can add those two together. 47.61 plus 77.44. And then you're caught up now with the rest of us. Q squared equals 125.05. So most of us will just go from this step right to this step because we've got calculators that can handle it. And that's what I'm going to show for the rest of this video. But for the rest of the video, those of you who don't have a calculator that can do that in one step, you're going to have to add this step to each of these questions. So apologies if you don't have a calculator that can do this. Now our last step, we are going to need to get rid of this squared. And the way you get rid of the squared, conveniently, it's always going to be a positive number, which means that you can always square root and get exactly the number we want. So all that we need to do is we need to do square root, which most calculators, it's second function your squared button. You get that square root. Oops, I did it twice. Whoops, there we go. So you got square root. I don't need square root 2. I need square root of 125.05. And there you go, 11.18. I guess I'll round that to one decimal place, which makes that 11.2. And since I've got units in the question, I should put units in my final answer. 11.2 centimeters. Okay, so that's an example where you're trying to find your hypotenuse. If you're trying to find one of the short sides, you don't want to add, right? Adding these two things together gets you a bigger number. But if you're trying to find one of the short legs, you don't want something bigger than your hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse is always the longest side of your triangle. So if you already have the longest side of your triangle, are you going to want to add? No, you're going to want to subtract, because you want a smaller number, right? You're trying to find a short side. So when you're trying to find a short side, instead of squaring them and adding them, you square them and subtract them. And that's really the only difference. And this one actually puts the c on the right-hand side for you. A squared equals c squared minus b squared. Really what matters is you're going to be subtracting from your hypotenuse because you want something smaller than your hypotenuse. And of course, if you add, you're going to get a bigger number. So let's try this one here. The diagonal here is 13, and the length is 9. Now, this one is a rectangle, not a triangle. But hopefully you know that the corner of a rectangle is 90 degrees. And up here, we have a right angle triangle then. And guess what? If the length at the bottom is 9, the length at the top is also 9 centimeters, right? One of those beautiful properties of rectangles for us right here. So our length is 9 centimeters. Our width we don't know. So all that I'm going to do, I'm just going to jump right into w squared, because that's what I'm trying to solve for. W squared equals, I've got 13 squared, and I've got 9 squared. And the only question is, am I adding these or subtracting these? Well, because 13 is the hypotenuse, right? 13, the diagonal of the triangle is opposite the right angle. That makes this the longest side. And the width has to be shorter than the longest side. So we're going to subtract. So now w squared equals 13 squared minus 9 squared is 88. And then I'm going to do second function to get square root. 88 equals 9.38. I guess I should show the work I did there. I square rooted both sides. So my width is 9.38. The 8 rounds us up to a 4. So 9.4, and our units again are centimeters. This one here, the reason I'm showing this one is it's got a mixed number here. This actually matters a lot for those of you going into trades, because we often use inches in the trades. We measure inches in fractions, but you can't really plug a fraction into your calculator very easily. So I'm going to show you how you can actually plug a fraction into your calculator, sort of cheat a little bit if you've got like a fancy calculator with brackets buttons. Or I'll show you just how to do it as a decimal. So first of all, the sort of cheaty way, you can actually plug 8.5 into your calculator this way. Well, actually, I guess let's set up our equation first, and we'll get to the calculator step in a sec. So y squared equals, because y squared is our hypotenuse, that is the longest side we're trying to find. So we're going to do 8.5 squared plus 5 squared. And I'm putting the 8.5 in brackets because we want 8.5 as a single number. We're squaring the whole thing, not just the half. Okay, so here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do brackets. 8.5 literally means 8 plus 1 divided by 2. So I can do 8 plus a half, which is 8.5 squared, plus 5 squared. And there you have it. It's 97.25. So y squared is 97.25. The other way to do it is you can actually take your 8.5 and turn it into a decimal. So if you do 1 divided by 2, 1 divided by 2, that gets you your fraction piece. So that's 0.5, which means that 8.5 is 8.5. So then instead of putting 8.5 in the calculator, you could do 8.5 squared plus 5 squared. And either way, you're going to get the same 97.25. So whichever way you prefer, if you want to sort of plug your fraction into your calculator using this 8 plus the fraction, your integer part plus your fraction part, that's great. Otherwise, you can turn it into a decimal. Last step, same as before, we are going to square root both sides. And so that gives us that y is second function square root 97 1/4 is 9.86. Again, this 6 means we need to round the 8 up to a 9. So this is 9.9 feet in this case, which is single tick. Okay, so that's Pythagorean theorem. The other thing you can use Pythagorean theorem for is sort of working backwards. Pythagorean theorem is only true, so it only works for 90-degree triangles. So if you've got a triangle and you're not sure if it's 90 degrees, one way you can actually check to see if it's 90 degrees is by plugging it into your basic c squared equals a squared plus b squared and see if it actually is equal. Because if it's equal, then Pythagorean theorem is true. And Pythagorean theorem only works if it actually is a right angle triangle. So let's try these. This first one here. If this is right angle, so if this is a 90-degree triangle, then short side squared, or I guess let's do it the other way around. So long side squared equals short side squared plus the other short side squared. So now we just need to check our left side and our right side. So 17 squared is 289. And I guess I'll do this in another color. 8 squared plus 15 squared. 8 squared plus 15 squared is 289. So yes, they are equal. Oh, so that should be a right angle, not an L. Here we go, right angle. So yes, that is a right angle triangle. Let's try the next one. So we're going to do our long side on the left-hand side. Right? The hypotenuse always has to be the longest side, so that has to be your C. So 50 squared equals, the other two sides are 44 and 29, so we'll square both of those. Let's try it. 50 squared is 2,500. So our left-hand side is 2,500. Our right-hand side, we put both of those together. 44 squared plus 29 squared. Ooh, 2777. Is 2,500 the same as 2777? No. So this is not 90 degrees. Last one. The long side here is the 5. So is 5 squared the same as 4 squared plus 3 squared? I don't need a calculator for this one. 5 squared is 25. 4 squared is 16. Plus 3 times 3 is 9. And guess what? 16 plus 9 is 25. So these are equal. So yes, that is a 90-degree triangle. Okay, and that works because Pythagorean theorem, this c squared equals a squared plus b squared, only works for 90-degree triangles. Cool, so those are the two ways we use Pythagorean theorem, either to find sides or to check if an unknown triangle is a 90-degree triangle. So there's practice for the next couple pages. I'd like you to do the, for those of you working in my class, I'd like you to do the odd number questions here. And I'd like you to do the left-hand side of this one. So the left-hand side of this one, all of this one. And you can do the odd number questions. 3, 5, 7, and 9.